There's a video game from 1998, a golf game of all things, that got recalled because somebody hid South Park inside it. Not a reference, not a joke. The actual uncensored pilot, short of South Park, buried in the disk data of Tiger Woods 99 for PlayStation, sitting in a file called zzdumy.dat, waiting for some kid to pop the disk into a computer and find it. And that's exactly what happened. A mother bought her son the game for Christmas. He put the disc into a PC. He opened the file, and out came 4 construction paper children screaming profanity, while Jesus Christ and Santa Claus beat each other half to death. First, 100,000 copies, all recalled by EA in January 1999. And the thing is, nobody at EA has ever definitively explained how it got there. The best theory? A developer needed a dummy file to fill space on the disk, grabbed an AVI they had saved on a server somewhere, and forgot about it. That little accident, that piece of junk data on a golf game disc, connects all the way back to the moment South Park was born. 2 film students, a piece of construction paper, an 8mm camera, and a foul-mouthed snowman. Tonight, we're going all the way down the South Park Iceberg. From the stuff everyone knows at the surface, Kenny dies every episode, Cartman's a sociopath, the show gets made in 6 days, all the way down to the things that most fans have never heard of. Lost episodes, hidden aliens, death threats, a $900 million deal, canceled video games, banned episodes that you literally cannot watch on any streaming platform in the world. The real identities behind the characters, production secrets that sound made up but aren't, and some things so deep and so strange that even the fan wikis can't fully explain them. So if you're watching this late at night, grab your blanket, get cozy, and let's begin. And before we go any further, I'd just like to kindly ask you to subscribe. It's completely free, and it really helps us improve the videos. Alright, let's start at the top of the iceberg, where the water's warm and the facts are familiar. But I promise you, we won't be staying up here for long. Every South Park fan knows the basics. The show premiered on Comedy Central on August 13th, 1997. It was created by Trey Parker and Matt Stone, who met as film students at the University of Colorado. It follows 4 boys, Stan Marsh, Kyle Broflovsky, Eric Cartman, and Kenny McCormick, in a small mountain town in Colorado. Kenny dies, usually violently, and comes back the next episode. Cartman says terrible things. The show makes fun of everyone and everything. It's been running for 28 seasons as of 2025, with over 330 episodes, making it one of the longest-running animated series in American television history. These are the facts you'd find on the back of a DVD box. And if that's all you know, you're standing on the very tip of the iceberg, and the ocean underneath you is deep. But even at the surface level, there are details that casual fans miss, like the fact that South Park has won 5 Primetime Emmy Awards and received a Peabody Award. The Peabody, awarded in 2005 for the show's 9th season, specifically praised the series for its postmodern social commentary, and noted that it pushes buttons, postmodern social commentary. That's a prestigious journalism and broadcasting award given to a show about foul-mouthed construction paper children. And I think that disconnect between how the show looks and what the show is one of the most important things to understand about South Park. It has always been smarter than it appears. That's the whole trick. Or the fact that the show was originally animated with actual construction paper. The pilot episode, Cartman Gets an Anal Probe, was made using paper cutouts, glue, and stop-motion techniques. Every episode after that has been animated digitally, using software that replicates that cutout look. Parker has said that the pilot took about 3 months to animate, and the result looked, in his words, terrible. The switch to digital happened almost immediately, and by the second episode, Weight Gain 4000, the entire process was computerized. But they kept the aesthetic. That handcrafted, deliberately crude look became the show's signature. Here's something else that sits right at the surface, but that most people don't think about: the evolution of Randy Marsh. In the first few seasons, Randy is a minor character. He's Stan's dad. He's a geologist. He shows up occasionally. He has no distinguishing personality traits. And then, gradually, over the course of about 10 seasons, Randy becomes arguably the most popular character on the show. More popular, by some measures, than any of the 4 boys. The shift happens so slowly that you don't notice it episode by episode. But if you watch season 1 and then jump to season 20, Randy has undergone one of the most dramatic character transformations in animation history. He goes from a bland authority figure to an impulsive, selfish, attention-seeking man-child who is, in many ways, a more accurate reflection of modern American masculinity than Cartman is. Cartman is a monster. Randy is ordinary. He's the guy who gets into fights at Little League games, who starts a weed farm because it sounds cool, who hears that a Whole Foods is opening and immediately starts gentrifying his own neighborhood. Randy Marsh is the suburban American male, stripped of all pretense, and his rise to prominence on the show mirrors a shift in what South Park is interested in satirizing. In the early seasons, the show was primarily about childhood, about the absurdity of adult behavior as seen through children's eyes. But as the show matured, it became more interested in the adults themselves, their hypocrisy, their selfishness, their willingness to sacrifice their children's well-being for their own comfort. And Randy became the vehicle for that criticism. The Tegrity Farms arc, which began in season 22 and continued through multiple subsequent seasons, divided the fanbase sharply. Randy moves the family to a marijuana farm and begins selling weed as Tegrity, a pun on integrity. Some fans loved it, others found it repetitive and thought the show was leaning too heavily on one joke. Parker and Stone were clearly having fun with it, but there was a sense among parts of the audience that the Randy-centric storytelling was coming at the expense of the four boys, who had always been the show's emotional core. And I think both sides have a point. Randy episodes are often among the funniest in any given season, but the show loses something when it forgets that its emotional censorship is four 9-year-old boys trying to make sense of a world that doesn't make sense. The Tegrity Farms storyline also revealed something interesting about the show's relationship with marijuana culture and drug legalization more broadly. South Park has never been straightforwardly pro-drug or anti-drug. It's mocked stoner culture. The Towelie character, introduced in Season 5, Episode 8, July 18th, 2001, is literally a talking towel whose primary function is getting high and annoying everyone around him. But it's also mocked the war on drugs and the absurdity of criminalizing marijuana while alcohol is freely available. Towelie himself started as a joke, a character so transparently designed to sell merchandise that the show made fun of the concept in the episode itself, and gradually became a recurring figure whose appearances range from complete nonsense to surprisingly poignant. His intervention episode, Crippled Summer, Season 14, Episode 7, April 28, 2010, is played as a genuine intervention documentary parody, and there's real pathos in watching a talking towel confront his addiction. South Park's ability to make you feel genuine emotion about a sentient piece of terry cloth is, I think, a testament to how good the writing can be when Parker commits to an idea. And here's another tangent I keep coming back to: the role of music in South Park. Parker is a trained musician. He studied music at the University of Colorado. And the musical content of South Park, from Chef's R&B songs, to the full Broadway-style numbers in the movie, to the original scores of the later seasons, is consistently among the most underrated aspects of the show. The Jackin' It in San Diego sequence, from Season 16, Episode 6, October 10th, 2012, is a fully produced music video that parodies tourism commercials while being about public masturbation. It's simultaneously disgusting and catchy. The Put It Down duet between Tweek and Craig in Season 21, Episode 2, September 20th, 2017, is a genuinely beautiful song about anxiety and the fear of nuclear war that also happens to be about two 10-year-old boys in a same-sex relationship. The music elevates South Park above most other animated comedies because Parker approaches the musical elements with the same seriousness and craftsmanship that he brings to the Book of Mormon. The joke is never that the music is bad. The joke is that the music is good, applied to something absurd. And that contrast, quality craftsmanship in service of crude content, is the fundamental aesthetic of everything Parker creates. I should also note, for the Iceberg completists, that South Park has had numerous notable guest stars over the years who most people don't remember. George Clooney voiced Sparky the dog, as I mentioned. Jerry Seinfeld was offered a role and turned it down, reportedly because he didn't find the show funny. Robert Smith of The Cure appeared as himself and was depicted as a hero who fights Mecha Streisand. Radiohead appeared in Scott Tenorman Must Die. Jennifer Aniston voiced a character in the Season 3 episode Rainforest Schmainforest. Natasha Henstridge was the first celebrity guest star to have actual speaking lines. In the Season 2 premiere, Terrence and Phillip in Not Without My Anus. Most celebrity appearances on South Park are uncredited or use pseudonyms, and the show has a long-standing tradition of celebrities being willing to appear in episodes that mock them, or at least appearing in episodes that mock someone else, while they play a different role entirely. And speaking of the boys, let me talk about Butters for a moment, because his journey through the iceberg is one of the most remarkable character developments in the show's history. Leopold Butters Stotch started as an unnamed background character in the first season. He didn't have a name, he didn't have lines, he was just a kid standing in a crowd. Gradually, over seasons 2 and 3, he began to emerge as a distinct character, anxious, naive, perpetually terrified of being grounded. By season 5, he was a regular. By season 6, when Kenny was killed off and the boys needed a fourth member, Butters became Kenny's temporary replacement. And then, through sheer force of his own appeal, he became the show's de facto fifth main character. Parker and Stone have said he's one of their favorite characters to write for, and it shows. Butters' episodes are often the show's most emotionally complex. The episode, Butters' Very Own Episode, Season 5, Episode 14, December 12th, 2001, is a perfect example. It's structured as a parody of a children's adventure story, with Butters narrating his own birthday celebration in an innocent, earnest voice. But the actual plot involves his father, Stephen Stotch, being discovered at a gay bathhouse, and his mother, Linda, attempting to murder Butters to cover up the family's shame. It's genuinely dark, and the contrast between Butters' oblivious cheerfulness and the horrific things happening around him is both hilarious and devastating. That contrast is the essence of the character. Butters sees the best in everyone. The world punishes him for it, and he keeps seeing the best anyway. He's the anti-Cartman. Where Cartman sees the worst in everyone and exploits it, Butters sees the best and gets exploited by it. Together, they represent the two extremes of human nature, and the show uses them to explore everything in between. Professor Chaos, the alter ego Butters adopts when he decides to become a supervillain, is another iceberg entry in itself. The name and concept were introduced in Season 6, Episode 6, Professor Chaos, which aired April 10th, 2002. Butters creates the persona after being rejected by the boys, and his evil plans are pathetically small scale, tearing tags off mattresses, switching soup orders at Bennigan's. The joke is that Butters is too fundamentally good to be a convincing villain, but there's a deeper irony. In the Coon and Friends trilogy, Season 13 and 14, Butters appears as Professor Chaos again, and he's more effective this time. And the reason he's more effective is that he's been beaten down by years of abuse and neglect. He's still not evil, but he's angry, and that anger makes him dangerous in a way that his innate goodness previously prevented. It's a character arc that plays out across multiple seasons, told in fragments, without the show ever explicitly drawing attention to it. You have to be watching carefully to see it, which is why it sits deeper in the iceberg. And here's a detail that connects Butters back to the real world. He's based on Eric Stowe, the show's supervising director of animation, the same guy who hides the alien visitors at the last minute, the same guy who voices Kenny's unhooded speech. Stowe has been with the show since the beginning. He's one of the most important people in the history of South Park, and his on-screen avatar is a sweet, anxious kid who gets grounded every week and occasionally tries to destroy the world with a tinfoil hat. I find that incredibly charming. And here's a detail I love. The name Butters comes from Stowe's real nickname. Parker and Stone have never fully explained why Stowe is called Butters, but the name stuck, and now it belongs to one of the most beloved characters in American animation. The real-world Stowe has been directing South Park's animation since the show premiered. He's responsible for the visual consistency of over 300 episodes. He oversees the team that turns Parker's scripts into finished animation in under a week. And his contribution is, in many ways, invisible, which makes it all the more fitting that his character is the kid nobody pays attention to until he does something extraordinary. And here's one more thing about the construction paper, because I keep coming back to it. The look of South Park. Trey Parker has said in interviews that the roughness of the animation is actually a deliberate choice, not a limitation. The simplicity of the character designs means the show can be produced faster, which is the entire reason South Park can do what no other scripted show in television does: make an episode in 6 days. 6 days. I need you to sit with that for a second. The 2011 documentary, 6 Days to Air, directed by Arthur Bradford, follows the production of the season 15 premiere, Human Centipede. It shows the entire process from Thursday, when Parker and Stone don't even have an idea yet, through the following Wednesday, when the finished episode is shipped to Comedy Central hours before airtime. The documentary shows Parker still writing the script on Tuesday night, less than 24 hours before broadcast. The animation team is working around the clock. The voice recording, the sound mixing, the color correction, All of it compressed into a window that most television shows would consider insulting. And they've been doing this since the 4th season. Before that, production took about 3 to 4 weeks per episode. But Parker and Stone found that the longer schedule made them second-guess themselves. They preferred the chaos. The pressure made the show better, sharper, more relevant. When something happens in the real world on a Monday, South Park can reference it by Wednesday. No other scripted show on Earth can say that. The documentary was nominated for an Emmy in the Outstanding Nonfiction Special category. And honestly, it's one of the best pieces of behind-the-scenes content ever made about any television show. If you haven't seen it, watch it. And while we're still near the surface, let's talk about the alien visitors. Because this is one of those facts that sounds like it should be common knowledge, but actually has a lot of misinformation around it. There's a widespread belief that the gray alien visitors from the first episode, the ones who gave Cartman the anal probe, are hidden somewhere in every single episode of South Park. And that's not true. South Park Studios addressed this directly on their FAQ page, saying, and I'm paraphrasing here, in every episode, no way. But the visitors are there quite a bit, sometimes right in plain sight, sometimes as hidden as a little visitor doodle. Eric Stowe, the show's director of animation, is usually the one who hides them, and he does it at the last minute, if he remembers. He doesn't keep track. According to the official word, the visitors appear in over half of episodes, but definitely not all of them. The frequency was much higher in the early seasons, including appearances in the opening credits, and it dropped off significantly as the show went on. In 2008, Comedy Central actually ran a contest during season 12 where fans could win prizes for spotting hidden visitors in the first 7 episodes. There are more than 80 confirmed sightings documented by fans, and likely 20 or more that still haven't been found. Some are tiny, hidden on a mug, on a poster in the school cafeteria, as a face on Charlie Manson's forehead for a single frame. The whole thing started as a fun Easter egg by the animation team, got exaggerated into a myth that they appear in every episode, and the truth is somewhere in between, which honestly is more interesting than either version of the story. Now let's go a layer deeper, because this is where things start getting genuinely fascinating. The spirit of Christmas. This is the origin story of South Park, and most fans know the broad strokes, but the details are wilder than you'd expect. But before we get to that, I want to linger on something about the show's cultural footprint in those early years, because the speed at which South Park became a phenomenon is itself an iceberg entry. When the show premiered in August 1997, Comedy Central was a second-tier cable network that most people in America didn't even have. Within weeks, South Park was the highest-rated show on basic cable. By the end of its first season, it was generating a merchandising empire that was largely bootleg. Parker and Stone have talked about how they couldn't walk down the street without seeing unlicensed Cartman t-shirts. The show didn't just become popular. It became a cultural event in a way that's hard to imagine now, in an era where attention is fragmented across hundreds of platforms. In 1997, South Park was unavoidable. The catchphrases, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny, you bastards. Screw you guys, I'm going home. Respect my authority," entered the American vocabulary overnight. Kids who'd never even seen the show were quoting it. Parents who'd never watched it were terrified of it. And all of this happened before the internet had the infrastructure to create viral content the way we understand it today. South Park went viral through word of mouth, bootleg VHS tapes, and sheer cultural momentum. It was the last great pre-internet phenomenon, and one of the first things to be amplified by the early internet simultaneously. The first season had 13 episodes. Parker wrote or co-wrote all of them. He directed all of them. He voiced most of the characters. He was 27 years old. Think about that for a second. A 27-year-old kid who'd made a construction paper Christmas short 3 years earlier was now running one of the most talked about television shows in America. And the thing that gets me about the first season is how rough it is compared to what came later. The animation is cruder. The storytelling is more episodic and less polished. The satire is broader, but there's an energy to those early episodes, a wildness, a willingness to throw anything at the wall that gives them a texture the later, more refined seasons sometimes lack. Big Gay Al's Big Gay Boat Ride, which aired September 3rd, 1997, was the show's 4th episode and tackled homosexuality in a way that was surprisingly progressive for 1997. Stan discovers his dog is gay, initially rejects him, and then goes on a journey through Big Gay Al's sanctuary that ends with Stan accepting Sparky exactly as he is. That episode was nominated for a GLAAD Media Award. Season 1, Episode 4. A show that would become synonymous with transgressive shock humor was being nominated for LGBTQ Media Awards 4 weeks into its run. Mr. Hanky, The Christmas Pooh, Season 1, Episode 9, December 17, 1997, is the episode that Fox didn't want. The talking piece of Christmas feces that the network couldn't stomach became one of the most iconic characters in the show's first season. And there's a layer to that episode that a lot of people miss. It's actually about being Jewish at Christmas. Kyle is the only Jewish kid in South Park. Everyone else is celebrating Christmas. He feels isolated and different. And Mr. Hanky becomes his friend specifically because nobody else sees him or believes Kyle when he talks about him. It's a show about alienation and belonging, disguised as a show about a singing piece of poo. And Fox looked at it and said no, which means Fox passed on a meaningful exploration of religious minority experience because it involved fecal matter, which is honestly the most South Park thing I can imagine. Let me also talk about Scott Tenorman Must Die, Season 5, Episode 4, July 11th, 2001, because it's frequently cited as the best episode of South Park ever made, and it sits at a very specific point in the iceberg. Most fans know about it, but I'm not sure most fans appreciate how thoroughly it changed what the show could be. Before this episode, Cartman was a brat, a selfish, bigoted, obnoxious kid who was the butt of as many jokes as he made. After this episode, Cartman was a genuine psychopath. The plot: a 9th grader named Scott Tenorman sells Cartman his pubic hair for $10, and Cartman spends the episode trying to get his money back. Every scheme fails. Scott humiliates him, and then Cartman does something that nobody, not the characters, not the audience, not the other writers, saw coming. He orchestrates the killing of Scott Tenorman's parents, has their bodies ground into chili, and feeds the chili to Scott at a public cook-off. Then he licks Scott's tears off his face and declares them yummy. The episode has a 9.6 on IMDb. Parker and Stone chose it as one of their 11 all-time favorites in 2003 and one of their 10 favorites in 2006. And the reason it matters for the iceberg is that it drew a line. Before Scott Tenorman Must Die, South Park was a show where bad things happened, but nobody was truly evil. After it, the show had a character capable of anything, and everything Cartman did from that point forward was colored by the knowledge that he had done this, that he was capable of this. It raised the stakes of the entire show retroactively, and it added a layer of genuine menace to a character who had previously been comic relief. That transition from annoying kid to monster is one of the most carefully executed character developments in the history of animated television, and it happened in a single 22-minute episode. And here's a deeper iceberg detail about that episode. In Season 14's 200 and 201, it's revealed that Jack Tenorman, Scott's father, one of the people Cartman had killed, was actually Cartman's biological father, which means Cartman unknowingly killed his own father and fed him to his half-brother. And when Cartman finds this out in 201, his reaction isn't horror, it's annoyance. He's upset that his father was a Denver Bronco, because Scott is ginger, which means Cartman is half ginger. That's what bothers him, not the patricide, the hair color. I could spend another 1,000 words on Scott Tenorman Must Die alone, and I've already rewatched it twice for this video. But let's move on, because the iceberg goes deeper. In December 1992, Trey Parker and Matt Stone were film students at the University of Colorado. Parker had already won a Student Academy Award for an animated short called American History, and he'd been experimenting with construction paper animation. He and Stone had been doing silly children's voices to amuse each other for about a year, messing around between takes on other students' films. Near the end of the fall semester, Parker conceived a short film called The Spirit of Christmas, also known as Jesus vs. Frosty. They animated it using construction paper, glue, and an old 8mm camera, and premiered it at the December 1992 student film screening. The short features 4 boys, recognizable as early versions of the main cast, but with different names. The fat kid is named Kenny. The hooded kid isn't named. The other 2 look like Stan and Kyle, but aren't identified. A snowman comes to life, goes on a murderous rampage, and Jesus appears to save the day. It's crude, it's offensive, and it's unmistakably South Park. Here's where it gets interesting. In 1995, Fox broadcasting executive Brian Graydon saw the 1992 short and paid Parker and Stone somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000. Accounts differ, to make a new version as a video Christmas card he could send to friends. They made Jesus vs. Santa, a much more polished short that explicitly names Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny, features Kyle being Jewish, has rats eating Kenny's corpse, and includes what would become a running reference on the show, Brian Boitano. Graydon distributed it to about 80 friends in December 1995. One of them was rumored to be George Clooney. The tape got passed around, and around, and around. It became one of the very first viral videos, spreading through bootleg VHS copies and early internet file sharing before the term viral video even existed. It caught the attention of Comedy Central, who hired Parker and Stone to develop a series. They pitched it to Fox first, but Fox declined because one of the characters was a sentient piece of feces, Mr. Hanky, who would go on to become one of the show's most beloved recurring characters. And that brings us back to Tiger Woods' 99. That 1995 short, Jesus vs. Santa, is what ended up hidden in the game disc. An EA employee apparently had a copy saved on a company server, and when they needed a dummy file to fill space on the PlayStation disc, they grabbed it. The file was called ZZDUMMY.dat, front-loaded with Z's, so it would sort to the bottom of any directory listing, and the PlayStation's optical drive would never accidentally read it during gameplay. The first 100,000 copies shipped with it. EA recalled them in January 1999, calling the content objectionable to consumers. When the company's general counsel was shown how to access the file, she reportedly watched the short in stern silence until Brian Boitano appeared on screen, at which point she briefly burst into laughter before going back to being serious. The person responsible was supposedly fired. The recalled copies are now collector's items. I've spent a lot of time on the origin story, and I know some of you are thinking, yeah, I knew most of that. But the thing is, the iceberg isn't just about knowing facts, it's about understanding how they connect. The construction paper, the Christmas short, the bootleg tapes, the golf game, the Fox rejection, Comedy Central, August 13th, 1997. Every single one of those links in the chain had to hold, or the show doesn't exist. And the fact that it all started with two college kids doing funny voices to annoy their film professors? I mean, that's South Park, right? Born out of chaos and spite, and the willingness to do something that everybody else thought was a bad idea. Let's go deeper. The show has 28 seasons as of late 2025, 338 episodes, including 7 standalone Paramount Plus specials. In August 2021, Parker and Stone signed a deal worth $900 million with Viacom CBS, now Paramount Global, that extended the show through at least 2027 and included 14 exclusive Paramount Plus specials, $900 million, for a show that was made for almost nothing in a college dorm room. That deal made Parker and Stone two of the highest paid creators in television history. And honestly, I think they earned it. No other show has maintained this level of cultural relevance for this long while also maintaining creative control. Parker and Stone have been writing, directing, producing, and voicing the majority of characters for nearly 3 decades. Parker voices Stan, Cartman, Randy, Mr. Garrison, Mr. Mackey, Butters, Jimmy, Craig, Timmy, and dozens more. Stone voices Kyle, Kenny, Butters' father Stephen Stotch, Jimbo, and others. Between the two of them, they are the show, and the deal reflected that. But here's something the deal also revealed, and this is where we start going into mid-iceberg territory. The Paramount Plus specials represent a shift in what South Park is. They're longer, 45 to 60 minutes instead of 22. They're more serialized, building on the show's experiments with season-long story arcs that began in earnest around season 18. And they exist in a strange space between television episodes and feature film. South Park, post-COVID, which premiered on Paramount Plus on November 25th, 2021, Thanksgiving Day, jumped 40 years into the future and showed adult versions of the main characters. Stan was a lonely alcoholic whose wife was literally an Amazon Alexa. Kyle was a school guidance counselor. Kenny was dead, permanently this time. And Cartman was a rabbi, a Jewish rabbi, married to a Jewish woman named Yentl, with 3 children named Moshe, Menorah, and Hakam. For a character who spent 24 years being the most prominent animated anti-Semite on television, this was a choice. And the show never tells you whether it's genuine or a decades-long con. Kyle is convinced it's fake. Cartman seems sincere. The follow-up special, The Return of COVID, aired December 16th, 2021, and muddied the waters even further. In the revised timeline, where things get fixed, Cartman ends up as a homeless alcoholic, and Butters tells Stan and Kyle not to feel sorry for him, because nothing could have saved Cartman from himself. And that ambiguity, is Cartman capable of genuine change? Or is he fundamentally, irreversibly broken? Is one of the deepest thematic questions the show has ever asked. And it asked it in a Paramount Plus special that most casual fans probably didn't even watch. Which means it's sitting down here in the iceberg, waiting for someone to find it. Let me talk about something that sits right in the middle of the iceberg, because it's the kind of thing that everyone has a vague awareness of, but very few people know the full story. The banned episodes. There are 5 episodes of South Park that you cannot watch on any streaming platform. Not Paramount Plus, not HBO Max, which had the show before Paramount Plus got exclusive rights in 2025. Not Hulu, not Amazon, not iTunes, nowhere. They are Super Best Friends, Season 5, Episode 3, which originally aired on July 4th, 2001. Cartoon Wars Part 1 and Cartoon Wars Part 2, Season 10, Episodes 3 and 4, April 2006. And 200 and 201, Season 14, Episodes 5 and 6, April 2010. All 5 episodes involve depictions of the Prophet Muhammad. And here's the thing that makes this truly wild. Super Best Friends aired in 2001, and nobody cared. Muhammad was shown as a member of a superhero team alongside Jesus, Buddha, Moses, Krishna, Joseph Smith, and Laozi. He had lines. He had a face. He used fire powers. The episode ran in reruns for years without any controversy whatsoever. It wasn't until after the Jyllands Posten Muhammad cartoon controversy in 2005, when a Danish newspaper published cartoons of Muhammad, and it led to global protests, riots, and death threats, that depicting Muhammad in any form became an explosive issue. When Cartoon Wars aired in 2006, Comedy Central censored Muhammad's image. Parker and Stone were furious. They publicly criticized Viacom president Doug Herzog for the decision. But it was 200 and 201 that pushed everything over the edge. In April 2010, to celebrate the show's 200th episode, Parker wrote a 2-part story bringing back virtually every celebrity the show had ever parodied. Tom Cruise, Kanye West, Mel Gibson, dozens of them, all filing a class action lawsuit against South Park. The central plot involved the celebrities wanting to steal Muhammad's apparent power of not being able to be mocked. Muhammad appeared on screen obscured by a black box reading "Censored." Before 201 aired, the radical Islamic organization Revolution Muslim posted a warning that Parker and Stone risked being murdered, comparing them to Dutch filmmaker Theo van Gogh, who was assassinated in 2004 for making a film about violence against women in Islamic societies. Comedy Central responded by inserting additional audio bleeps throughout 201, censoring not just Muhammad's name, but the entire 2-minute moral speech at the end of the episode. Parker and Stone released a statement afterward. In the 14 years we've been doing South Park, we have never done a show that we couldn't stand behind. We delivered our version of the show to Comedy Central, and they made a determination to alter the episode. Police presence at Comedy Central headquarters was elevated due to the nature of the threats. In a 2016 oral history of South Park in The Hollywood Reporter, Vernon Chapman, the voice of Towelie and a writer-producer on the show, revealed that after the censorship, Parker purchased a plane ticket to South Africa and showed it to the head of the network as a threat, referencing Dave Chappelle's famous departure to Africa. Parker never actually went. The DVD release of 200 includes the uncensored version with Muhammad's name intact. But 201 on the DVD is still the censored version. Both episodes were completely omitted from the Region 2 and Region 4 DVD releases. When the show moved to HBO Max in 2020, all 5 Muhammad-related episodes were excluded. They remain unavailable on Paramount Plus as of 2025. The depiction of Buddha snorting cocaine in these episodes also led to the entire series being banned in Sri Lanka. 5 episodes of a 28-season show vanished from legal circulation because a real threat of real violence made a television network decide that some jokes weren't worth dying for. And whether you think that was the right call or a capitulation to terror depends on where you sit on some very big questions about art, speech, fear, and power. The show itself has a very clear opinion on the matter, but the show can't air those opinions anymore. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't a light video, and we're about to go deeper. Let's talk about the things that almost happened. The lost and canceled projects, the alternate versions of episodes, the things that exist in the spaces between what South Park is and what it could have been. There was a South Park game for the Game Boy Color that was developed in 1998 and never released. It exists in ROM form. People have found it, dumped it, played it, but it was never officially sold. There was also an open-world South Park game that was in development around 2005 and was canceled. The Stick of Truth, which eventually came out in 2014, was a completely different project that went through multiple developers and years of production hell before Obsidian Entertainment finally delivered it. The game was originally being developed by THQ, who went bankrupt in 2012, and the rights were picked up by Ubisoft. Parker was deeply involved in the creative process and reportedly had the same perfectionist anxiety about it that he has about every episode of the show. There's a lost episode concept called The Return of Lemmiwinks that was planned for production around 2004 but was never made. Production materials for it exist somewhere, but the episode was shelved. There's also The Very First Gentleman, which was the original version of the season 20 episode, Oh Geez, the episode that aired the week of the 2016 presidential election. Parker and Stone had written an episode assuming Hillary Clinton would win. When Trump won instead, they had to completely rewrite the episode in less than 24 hours. The original Clinton victory version was partially completed, but never aired. Some production materials exist, making it one of the most fascinating what-if artifacts in television history. And I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but that's the nature of the iceberg. The deeper you go, the stranger things get, and the connections between them become more tangled and more interesting. Like the fact that George Clooney voiced Stan's gay dog Sparky in the season 1 episode Big Gay Al's Big Gay Boat Ride, and also reportedly helped spread the Jesus vs. Santa tape around Hollywood. Or that the character of Tolkien Black, who was called Token for 25 seasons before the show revealed the spelling was always Tolkien, as in J.R.R. Tolkien, was a meta-commentary on assumptions that audiences make about black characters. Parker and Stone had apparently planned that joke for years. Or how about this? The voice of Kenny. For most of the show's run, Kenny's muffled speech has been provided by Matt Stone, but the actual words Kenny is saying under that hood are real lines. They're often incredibly profane or absurd, and in the early seasons especially, they were genuinely scripted dialogue that was just muffled to the point of inaudibility. Dedicated fans have been deciphering Kenny's lines for decades, and in many cases, they're the dirtiest jokes in any given episode. When Kenny speaks clearly, which happens occasionally, particularly in the Mysterion storyline, it's usually Stone's voice pitched up slightly. And while we're talking about voices, there's the matter of how the show sounds. The first 3 seasons of South Park were scored with stock library music. From season 4 onward, original music has been used. But those early library cues became iconic to the show's tone. The little guitar riffs, the dramatic stings, the goofy background loops. They're embedded in the DNA of early South Park. And when you rewatch those episodes, the music is as much a part of the experience as the dialogue. The shift to original scoring was gradual and largely unnoticed by viewers, but it represented a significant maturation of the show's production. Now here's something that sits a bit deeper in the iceberg, and it's about the real people behind the characters. Most fans know the broad strokes. Stan is based on Trey Parker, Kyle is based on Matt Stone, but the specifics are wilder than people realize. In a 2000 interview, Parker revealed that Kenny McCormick is based on a real childhood friend of his, also named Kenny. The real Kenny was the poorest kid in the neighborhood, wore an orange parka that genuinely muffled his speech, and, this is the part that always gets me, would occasionally skip school. When he was absent, Parker and his friends would jokingly say he'd died, and then a few days later, he'd show up again like nothing had happened. That's it. That's the entire origin of one of the most famous running gags in television history. A poor kid in Colorado who skipped school and wore a tight parka. Parker took that real-world observation, the disappearance, the return, the muffled voice, the poverty, and turned it into Kenny McCormick. And Kenny's muffled speech in the show? It's Matt Stone speaking into his cupped hand. The words are real, they're scripted, and they're usually the filthiest lines in any given episode. Dedicated fans have been deciphering them for decades, and in many cases, Kenny is saying things so profane that they'd get the show pulled off the air if anyone could actually hear them clearly. And here's a tangent, but I think it's a good one. When Kenny speaks clearly on the show, which he does occasionally, particularly in the Mysterion episodes and a few others, his unhooded voice is usually provided by Eric Stowe, who is the show's supervising director of animation. Stowe is also the basis for Butters. Yeah, Butters, that sweet, anxious, perpetually grounded kid. is based on the real human being who has been running South Park's animation department for over 2 decades. Parker and Stone have said that Stoph shares Butter's naive optimism and earnest demeanor, and that the character evolved from an affectionate joke about their colleague. The name Butters comes from Stoke's real nickname, and the fact that one of South Park's most beloved characters is basically a cartoon version of the guy in charge of making the show function on a technical level is the kind of detail that makes you look at the whole thing differently. Cartman's name, contrary to a popular myth, is not derived from German World War II fighter ace Erich Hartmann, which would be fitting given Cartman's well-documented admiration for Hitler. It's actually based on a friend of Parker and Stone's named Matt Cartman, who was known for being slightly overweight, short, and devastatingly good at verbal comebacks. Parker came up with the name Cartman during a Super Bowl party on January 29, 1995. Cartman's mother, Leanne, is named after one of Trey Parker's ex-girlfriends. That's not a subtle reference. Parker deliberately named the character after his ex, and then made her one of the most promiscuous characters on television. A woman who has slept with virtually every adult male in South Park. Make of that what you will. Stan is modeled after Parker. Kyle is modeled after Stone. Their friendship on the show is intended to reflect the real-life friendship between its creators. Stan's tendency to vomit when he's nervous around Wendy Testaburger was based on Parker's real experiences with anxiety around girls when he was young. Kyle being Jewish reflects Stone's Jewish heritage. These aren't just character traits, they're autobiography disguised as animation. And I think that's part of why the show has lasted so long. There's something real underneath the absurdity. Even at its most extreme, South Park is rooted in actual experiences and actual relationships. Chef, Isaac Hayes' character, who was killed off in season 10, has his own iceberg entry, and it's one of the most complex behind-the-scenes stories in the show's history. Hayes, the legendary soul musician, voiced Chef from the show's premiere in 1997 through the end of season 9. Chef was the school cafeteria worker, the adult the boys trusted, the voice of reason, who also happened to be obsessed with making love to women. Hayes performed original songs as Chef, backed by a band called DVD-A, which, yes, is a real pornographic term, and which consisted of Parker, Stone, and crew members Bruce Howell and D.A. Young. For 9 seasons, Hayes voiced Chef without objection, despite the show targeting virtually every religion, race, culture, and ideology on the planet. Then, in November 2005, Season 9 aired Trapped in the Closet, which mocked Scientology, depicted Tom Cruise literally trapped in a closet, and explained Scientology's origin story. The story of Xenu, the galactic overlord, with a banner at the bottom of the screen reading, "This is what Scientologists actually believe." Hayes was a Scientologist, and in March 2006, just before the episode was set to re-air, Hayes quit the show, releasing a statement criticizing South Park for its inappropriate ridicule of religious communities. Parker and Stone's response was pointed. Stone told the Associated Press, "In 10 years and over 150 episodes, Isaac never had a problem with the show making fun of Christians, Muslims, Mormons, or Jews. He got a sudden case of religious sensitivity when it was his religion featured on the show." They wrote Hayes' departure into the show in the season 10 premiere, The Return of Chef, which aired March 22nd, 2006. In the episode, Chef returns to South Park after being brainwashed by a group called the Super Adventure Club, a thinly veiled stand-in for Scientology. Chef's dialogue in the episode was pieced together from audio clips of Hayes' previous recordings, cut and spliced to create new sentences. At the end of the episode, Chef is killed in an extraordinarily graphic manner, struck by lightning, impaled on a tree branch, mauled by a grizzly bear and a mountain lion, his face torn off, and his body set on fire before falling into a ravine. Stan's farewell speech makes the subtext explicit. We shouldn't be mad at Chef for leaving us. We should be mad at that fruity little club for scrambling his brain. Here's where it gets murkier though. There have been persistent reports, never fully confirmed, never fully denied, that Hayes' departure was not entirely his own decision. In a 2016 Hollywood Reporter oral history of South Park, it was suggested that Hayes had suffered a stroke in January 2006 and was not in full control of his faculties when the resignation statement was issued. Hayes' son, Isaac Hayes III, told the Hollywood Reporter that the Scientology resignation was absolutely not his father's decision, claiming that people around Hayes made the call while he was recovering. "My father was not in the best of health. We would go over to his house for dinner, and there would be Scientologists there, cooking dinner." Hayes died on August 10th, 2008, at the age of 65. The exact circumstances of his departure from South Park remain disputed. I've rewatched The Return of Chef probably 3 or 4 times putting this video together, and it hits different when you know the backstory. It's not just a comedy episode. It's a eulogy and an accusation wrapped in one. Parker and Stone loved Hayes. They respected him enormously. And they were angry, genuinely angry, at what they perceived as an outside force taking him away from the show. Whether you think they were right or wrong about the specifics, the emotion behind that episode is real. You can feel it. And this connects to a broader pattern in the iceberg, the real-world consequences of South Park's satire. The Muhammad episodes led to death threats. The Scientology episode led to the loss of a cast member. The show has been banned in multiple countries. Individual episodes have been the subject of lawsuits, protests, and governmental action. Parker and Stone have been put under FBI protection. They've been doxxed. They've had their lives threatened by real organizations with the actual capacity for violence. And they kept making the show. For 28 years, they kept going. And I think there's something important about that. Something that goes beyond just comedy. Whether you agree with every joke they've made or not, and I certainly don't, the willingness to keep creating in the face of genuine personal danger says something about their commitment to the principle that nothing should be off limits for satire. The question of whether that principle is noble or reckless is one of the deep questions at the bottom of the iceberg, and I don't think there's a simple answer. And here's a tangent, but I think it's an important one. The real-world consequences of the show didn't just affect Parker and Stone. They affected the people they satirized, sometimes in ways that are hard to feel good about. When Trapped in the Closet aired in November 2005, the Church of Scientology reportedly launched a private investigation into Parker and Stone, looking for personal information that could be used against them. Parker told Rolling Stone in 2006 that he and Stone expected Scientology to come after them, and they were careful about what they said in private as a result. Tom Cruise allegedly pressured Viacom, the parent company of both Comedy Central and Paramount, which was about to release Mission: Impossible 3, to prevent Trapped in the Closet from being rerun. Comedy Central pulled the rerun, though they later aired it again. Cruise denied any involvement. The show also affected Isaac Hayes in ways I've already discussed, but there are less prominent examples. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation received complaints about Terrence and Phillip episodes that mocked Canadian culture, though these were generally handled with good humor by Canadian audiences, who mostly found the portrayal funny. Environmental organizations were not pleased with the original Man Bear Pig episodes. Steve Irwin's family was reportedly upset by a Season 8 cameo that was made shortly after his death in 2006, though accounts differ on the specifics of their reaction. The point is, South Park exists in a relationship with the real world that most fictional shows don't. Its satire has real consequences, real victims, and real defenders. And navigating that terrain, knowing when to push and when to pull back, when satire is serving a purpose, and when it's just being cruel, is one of the most difficult creative challenges in all of entertainment. And you know what's fascinating? Parker and Stone have gotten it wrong sometimes. They've admitted it. The Man-Bear-Pig situation is the clearest example. When they first introduced Man-Bear-Pig in Season 10, Episode 6, April 26, 2006, it was a clear parody of Al Gore and what they perceived as his alarmist approach to climate change. Gore was depicted as deluded. Man-Bear-Pig was presented as imaginary. And the episode's message was essentially, this guy is crying wolf. Then, 12 years later, in the season 22 two-parter Time to Get Cereal and Nobody Got Cereal, episodes 6 and 7, November 7th and 14th, 2018, the show brought Man-Bear-Pig back. Except this time, Man-Bear-Pig was real. He was destroying South Park. And the joke wasn't on Gore anymore. The joke was on the people, including, implicitly, Parker and Stone themselves, who had ignored the warnings. The episodes explicitly parody climate change denial and the short-sighted thinking that leads societies to ignore existential threats until it's too late. It's one of the very few times South Park has gone back and corrected itself. And the fact that they did it, that they were willing to say, essentially, we were wrong about this, and here's a 2-part episode about why, tells you something important about who they are. They're not ideologues, they're satirists who follow the evidence, even when the evidence says they were on the wrong side. I've been thinking about this a lot while putting this video together, and I think the Man-Bear-Pig arc might be the most important thing South Park has ever done, precisely because it demonstrates growth. A show that's been running for 28 years has to grow. It has to evolve. It has to be willing to look at its own past and say, we got that one wrong. And the fact that South Park can do that, can mock itself as ruthlessly as it mocks everyone else, is the real reason it's survived this long. Let me also talk about the movie, because South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut, sits at its own specific point in the iceberg. Released June 30th, 1999, between the show's second and third seasons, it was a full musical, with original songs composed by Parker and Mark Shaman. Blame Canada was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Original Song. Uncle Fucka is one of the most technically impressive musical numbers ever animated, a full-on Broadway-style production number performed by Terrence and Phillip, with sophisticated choreography and orchestration built around the word fuck, repeated dozens of times. The movie earned an R rating from the MPAA, and the battle to avoid NC-17 became part of the film's promotional narrative. Parker and Stone made the argument that the MPAA's objections to animated profanity were more stringent than their objections to live-action violence, which became a running theme in the film itself. The movie is literally about censorship, about parents blaming Canada for their children's behavior, rather than examining their own failures. The movie features Kenny dying, going to hell, meeting Satan and Saddam Hussein, who are in a romantic relationship, and ultimately sacrificing himself to save the world. Kenny's unhooded face and voice were revealed for the first time in the film, voiced by Mike Judge, the creator of Beavis and Butthead, which is its own kind of deep-cut connection. The film grossed $83 million worldwide and received overwhelmingly positive reviews. Roger Ebert gave it 3.5 stars. It remains one of the highest-grossing R-rated animated films in history and one of the most critically acclaimed. And here's a deep iceberg production detail about the movie. The MPAA gave the original cut an NC-17 rating 6 times. Parker and Stone had to resubmit the film repeatedly, making cuts each time, before finally receiving an R rating. Parker has said that at one point, the MPAA objected to a scene on the basis that Saddam Hussein's penis was too realistic in an animated film made of construction paper. Parker responded by redrawing the penis to look like a dildo, which the MPAA accepted. The idea that a cartoon penis was too realistic but a cartoon dildo was fine became a running joke in interviews and perfectly encapsulates the absurdity of American content regulation that the film was satirizing. Let me shift gears one more time and talk about something that's been nagging at me throughout this video. The iceberg format implies that there's a bottom, that if you go deep enough, you reach some final layer, some ultimate truth. But I don't think that's how South Park works. I think the iceberg extends downward infinitely because the show is still running. New episodes create new facts, new controversies, new hidden details. The iceberg of 2025 is deeper than the iceberg of 2020, which was deeper than the iceberg of 2010, and it will keep getting deeper for as long as the show continues. Season 27, which premiered on July 23rd, 2025, heavily lampooned President Trump, with a parody running through every episode. This after Parker and Stone had initially stated they wanted to skip parodying Trump in the 2024 election. Trump is shown having an abusive relationship with Satan. The season also featured a parody of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem and conservative commentator Charlie Kirk. While Noem criticized her portrayal, Kirk reportedly called it a badge of honor. Following Kirk's assassination on September 10, 2025, the episode Got a Nut was pulled from reruns, though it remained available on streaming platforms. This is the most recent entry on the iceberg as of when I'm making this video, and it demonstrates that even in its 28th year, South Park is still generating the kind of real-world consequences that have defined its entire run. Season 28 premiered October 15th, 2025, and consists of 5 episodes, a much shorter season than the show's traditional 10-episode runs. The show has a new 5-year deal with Paramount Plus that guarantees 10 episodes per year, split across shorter seasons and supplemented by streaming specials. The production model has fundamentally changed since the early days, but the core remains the same. Parker writes, Stone produces, the team crunches. The episode ships hours before air. The world reacts, and that's where we are. 28 seasons, 338 episodes and counting, 7 Paramount Plus specials, a feature film, 2 major video games, a Broadway musical, a $900 million deal, followed by a 5-year extension, death threats, banned episodes, hidden aliens, canceled games, recalled golf discs, construction paper, and a guy named Kenny who keeps dying. Let me bring it all home now. But actually, Before I do, because I keep thinking of things I haven't covered, let me touch on a few more entries that sit in the middle to deep layers of the iceberg, because they deserve attention. The Imagination Land trilogy, Season 11, Episodes 10 through 12, October and November 2007, is one of the most ambitious things the show has ever attempted. It's a 3-part epic in which terrorists attack the collective human imagination, and the government has to decide whether to nuke Imagination Land to prevent the evil imaginary characters from escaping into reality. It features dozens of fictional characters from every conceivable source: Aslan, Gandalf, Luke Skywalker, Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, Ronald McDonald, Strawberry Shortcake, all interacting in a massive fantasy war. Meanwhile, Cartman's B-plot involves him suing Kyle over a bet about leprechauns, which goes all the way to the Supreme Court. The trilogy won the Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program, and was later released as a standalone movie because of how cinematic it felt. And here's the iceberg detail about Imagination Land that most people don't know. The trilogy was originally conceived as the second South Park movie. Parker and Stone had been developing ideas for a theatrical sequel to bigger, longer, and uncut, and the Imagination Land concept was one of the frontrunners. When they realized they could do it as a 3-part television event instead, they pivoted. The decision was partly practical. Making a movie requires years of development, and the television format allowed them to execute the idea quickly, and partly philosophical. Parker has said that he doesn't see a meaningful difference between a 3-episode television arc and a 90-minute film. The medium doesn't matter, the storytelling does. And Imagination Land tells a story as big and as ambitious as any animated film of the 2000s, in 3 22-minute episodes made in 6 days each. The pandemic episodes, Season 12, Episodes 10 and 11, October 2008, are another mid-iceberg entry that took on new significance after 2020. The 2-parter is ostensibly about the boys starting a Peruvian flute band, but it spirals into a found footage horror parody involving giant guinea pigs attacking the world. It's absurd, it's silly, but in 2020, when the actual pandemic hit, fans went back and rewatched these episodes with new eyes, and the coincidences between the show's satirical version of pandemic response and the real thing were uncomfortable. The government's response in the show, confused, contradictory, more concerned with optics than outcomes, mapped onto reality in ways that the writers could never have anticipated. South Park has always been described as prophetic. I think it's more accurate to say that the show is perceptive. It sees patterns in human behavior and extrapolates them to absurd conclusions, and sometimes reality catches up with the absurdity. I should also mention Trapped in the Closet, Season 9, Episode 12, November 16th, 2005, which, along with the later chef departure, represents the show's most significant real-world collision with an established institution. The episode explains Scientology's origin story, the Xenu narrative, in detail. Complete with the on-screen text, this is what Scientologists actually believe. It depicts Tom Cruise literally trapped in a closet, refusing to come out, in what was read by many as a double entendre about his sexuality. R. Kelly shows up and also gets trapped in the closet. The writing credit for the episode goes to John Smith, Parker and Stone's pseudonym, which was itself a joke. The episode won the Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program for the 2005 to 2006 season. The real-world aftermath was significant. As I mentioned earlier, the Church of Scientology reportedly launched a private investigation into Parker and Stone. Comedy Central pulled a planned rerun of the episode in early 2006, which many attributed to pressure from Tom Cruise, though this was never confirmed. The rerun was eventually reinstated later in the year after public outcry, and Isaac Hayes left the show, either of his own volition or at the urging of Scientology handlers, depending on which account you believe. The episode demonstrated, more clearly than anything before it, that South Park's satire could have consequences beyond angry letters and negative press. It could actually threaten the careers and safety of the people who made it. And one more. The Losing Edge, Season 9, Episode 5, April 6th, 2005, is one of my personal favorite episodes, and it sits in the iceberg at a particular angle because it's not controversial, it's not landmark, and it's rarely discussed in the context of greatest episodes ever. But it's almost perfect. The boys don't want to play baseball. They hate baseball, but they keep winning. And winning means they have to keep playing, all the way through the postseason. So they try to lose on purpose. But the other teams are also trying to lose, because they also don't want to keep playing. And the entire B-plot involves Randy getting into increasingly violent fights with other dads at the games. It's an episode about the absurdity of youth sports culture, the aggression of suburban parents, and the way adults project their own frustrations onto their children's activities. And it's funny, really, genuinely, consistently funny, from start to finish. I bring it up because the iceberg isn't just about controversy and hidden details. It's also about the episodes that are simply great at being television, and the losing edge is great television. There's also the matter of South Park's legacy in the broader landscape of adult animation. When the show premiered in 1997, the adult animation space was relatively small. The Simpsons had been running since 1989. Beavis and Butthead had run from 1993 to 1997. King of the Hill started in 1997 as well. Family Guy wouldn't premiere until 1999. The landscape now, with Rick and Morty, BoJack Horseman, Archer, Bob's Burgers, Big Mouth, Invincible, and dozens of others, is almost unrecognizable compared to 1997. And South Park is responsible for a significant portion of that growth. It proved that adult animation could be topical, that it could engage with current events, that it could be politically charged and philosophically serious, while also being crude and funny. Every adult animated series that has engaged with real-world politics owes a debt to South Park, whether its creators acknowledge it or not. The show has also influenced comedy writing more broadly. The 6-day production schedule, while impossible for most shows to replicate, inspired a mindset among comedy writers that topicality matters more than polish. That it's better to say something imperfect about what's happening right now than something polished about what happened 6 months ago. Saturday Night Live has always operated under similar time pressure, but SNL is a sketch show. It's designed for that format. South Park is a scripted, animated series that manages the same feat, which is a fundamentally different kind of achievement. And here's one last deep iceberg entry that I've been saving. There's a piece of South Park mythology that's never been fully confirmed or denied. The rumor is that Parker and Stone have, at various points over the show's run, embedded messages or codes in episodes that reference events or facts not yet publicly known. The most frequently cited example involves the show's handling of various celebrity scandals, where jokes made about specific celebrities in episodes that aired weeks or months before those celebrities' real-world behavior became public. Some fans attribute this to Parker and Stone having inside information through their Hollywood connections. Others say it's coincidence. Others say the show's willingness to make dark jokes about everyone means they're bound to hit close to the truth occasionally. The reality is probably mundane, but the legend persists in the deepest parts of the fan community. And I mention it because the iceberg is supposed to be complete, from the verified facts at the top to the unverifiable legends at the bottom. Now let me actually bring it home. I started this video by talking about junk data on a golf disc, a file that was never supposed to be seen. And now, a few hours later, we've gone from the surface, Kenny dies, Cartman's fat, the show gets made in 6 days, all the way down to the depths, death threats, banned episodes, canceled games, real-world casualties, and the philosophical question of what it means for a show to mock everything without believing in anything. And I realize, sitting here at the end of this, that the iceberg is actually a map, not of South Park's secrets, but of its significance. Every layer we pass through, the origin story, the production innovations, the cultural impact, the controversies, the character arcs, the real-world consequences, represents a different dimension of what this show has meant to people for nearly 30 years. And the fact that we can go this deep, that there's this much to talk about, that a show made of construction paper and profanity can sustain this level of analysis, that's not something you can fake. That's the product of genuine craft, genuine thought, and genuine courage. Even when the show gets things wrong, even when the satire is cruel, even when the both sides are dumb approach becomes its own kind of laziness. I think about Trey Parker, 27 years old, sitting in an apartment in Los Angeles, animating construction paper cutouts with an 8mm camera, making voices with his best friend. I think about him at 55, still writing scripts on Tuesday nights, still finishing episodes hours before air, still feeling that mixture of relief and shame every time one goes out. And I think about the fact that the distance between those two moments, the kid with the camera and the man with the Emmy, is bridged by a single, unbroken creative output. Parker has never stopped making South Park. He's paused, he's taken breaks, but he's never stopped. And the show he's making today, for all the ways it's changed, is still recognizably the same thing as the construction paper short from 1992. The same sensibility, the same refusal to take anything seriously, the same construction paper aesthetic, the same voice. And maybe that's the real bottom of the iceberg. Not a secret, not a mystery, just the fact that one person, well, two people, because you can't tell this story without Matt Stone, had an idea when they were young, and they've been working on it ever since, and they haven't stopped, and they haven't compromised, and they haven't gone away. In an industry defined by compromise and cancellation, and the relentless churn of what's next, South Park is still here, construction paper and all. Here's the last thing I want to leave you with. Let me shift gears and talk about some of the mid-tier iceberg entries that are fascinating, but don't get enough attention. The unaired pilot, Before Cartman Gets an Anal Probe, was broadcast on August 13th, 1997. There was an earlier version of the episode, an unaired pilot that differs from the version that eventually aired. In the original cut, Cartman had a father and a sister, neither of whom appeared in the series' subsequent run. The pilot featured different jokes, different pacing, and a slightly different animation style. At one point, an animator's hand is clearly visible in the frame. Parker and Stone submitted a cut that was 27 minutes long, without room for commercial breaks. When Comedy Central executive Doug Herzog saw the pilot, he suggested that the running gag of killing Kenny might not work. Parker and Stone looked at him funny, and he later recalled that he just sort of shut up and got out of the way. The unaired pilot has been widely circulated among fans, but was never officially released. It's one of the closest things South Park has to genuinely lost media. Fox rejected the show because of Mr. Hanky, a talking piece of Christmas poo. Think about that. Fox Broadcasting looked at South Park and said, "The sentient feces character is too much." They also felt that a show starring children couldn't be as popular as shows with adult or family cast, like The Simpsons and King of the Hill. The decision probably cost Fox billions of dollars in revenue. Comedy Central, at the time, was a relatively small cable network that was hungry for original content. Parker and Stone also pitched to MTV but chose Comedy Central, fearing MTV might soften the show for a younger audience. South Park transformed Comedy Central into a major player. By the time the show's second season premiered, it was the highest rated program on cable television, and Comedy Central's subscriber base had grown significantly. Bootleg South Park merchandise was everywhere. Cartman bongs, Kenny hash pipes, crappy t-shirts. Doug Herzog recalled sending people to Venice Beach to confiscate bootleg merch, and every Monday morning, there'd be a collection on his desk. And here's something I find genuinely eerie. In the show's early seasons, particularly seasons 1 through 4, the opening credits contained an image of dozens of South Park characters standing together. Muhammad was in that image, standing right there among the crowd, in the opening credits that aired every single week, and nobody noticed. Or if they noticed, nobody cared. He was there for years. That image ran in the opening credits of a show watched by millions of people, and it was never a controversy until the broader cultural conversation around depicting Muhammad made it one. When they eventually updated the opening credits, Muhammad was removed, but for years, he was right there in plain sight. The word shit was said 162 times in the season 5 premiere, It Hits the Fan, which aired June 20th, 2001. The episode was about the moment when a fictional television show said shit uncensored on air, and the entire town of South Park descends into chaos as everyone starts using the word freely. An on-screen counter tracked every use during the original broadcast. The count was deliberate and precise. At the time, it set a record for most uses of the word in a single television episode. South Park holds a Guinness World Record for the most profanity in an animated series, and It Hits the Fan is a significant part of why. I've been putting this video together for a while, and the thing I keep coming back to is how much of South Park's history exists in these liminal spaces. The things that almost happened. The things that were changed at the last minute. The things that exist in some form but can't be officially accessed. The uncensored version of 201 that Parker and Stone submitted to Comedy Central before the network added bleeps is, according to those who've seen it, one of the most pointed statements about free speech and religious violence that the show ever made. And you can't watch it. Not legally. You can watch a version where Kyle's moral speech is completely bleeped out, which is, if you think about it, a pretty profound act of irony. The speech is about how you can't give in to intimidation and violence, and it was silenced by the threat of violence. The censorship is the point, whether Comedy Central intended it that way or not. The show has been banned, at various points and in various forms in several countries. Sri Lanka banned it outright over the depictions in 200 and 201. Various episodes have been censored or withheld in different territories for different reasons. The British pay television channel Sky One banned the airing of proper condom use due to frequent sexual references. The Australian version of the video game South Park, The Stick of Truth, had several scenes cut that referenced alien anal probing. The European version was also censored in several countries. In the European releases, the censored scenes were replaced with a still image of a crying koala bear, with text describing what the player was missing. That image became a meme in itself. Some players actually argued the censorship was funnier than the original content. And on the subject of the games, The Fractured But Whole, released in 2017, had a difficulty slider that was directly tied to the character's skin color. Choosing a darker skin color made the game harder, not combat. That stayed the same. Everything else. Parker insisted this was a statement about systemic racism in America. Cartman, the in-game narrator, tells the player that it won't affect combat difficulty, but will affect every other aspect of your whole life. The game's dialogue changes based on this choice throughout the entire playthrough. It was one of the boldest design decisions in modern gaming, and it was hiding in plain sight inside a South Park game that most critics treated as a competent RPG sequel. There's also the canceled and unreleased games that sit in the deeper layers of the iceberg. There was a South Park game for the Game Boy Color, developed in 1998, that was never released. Its ROM exists, and people have found and played it, but it was never sold commercially. There was an open-world South Park game in development around 2005 that was completely canceled. The Stick of Truth itself went through production hell, originally developed by THQ, who went bankrupt in 2012 before the rights were picked up by Ubisoft. Parker was deeply involved in the creative process and reportedly had the same perfectionist anxiety about the game that he has about every episode of the show. I want to talk about Parker and Stone as people for a moment, because there's a layer of the iceberg that illuminates the show in ways that the episodes alone can't. Parker and Stone attended the 2000 Academy Awards wearing dresses, full-on gowns. Parker wore a replica of the green Versace dress that Jennifer Lopez had famously worn to the Grammy Awards earlier that year. Stone wore a pink spaghetti strap dress. They've admitted they were tripping on acid at the time. In the 2016 Hollywood Reporter oral history, Stone recalled, "Some people were stoked, Michael Caine being one. But I remember Gloria Estefan was super pissed." Their film, South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut, released June 30th, 1999, was nominated for Best Original Song for Blame Canada, and it lost to Phil Collins' You'll Be in My Heart from Tarzan. Parker and Stone mocked Phil Collins in 2 consecutive Season 4 episodes, Cartman's Silly Hate Crime 2000 and Timmy 2000. Robin Williams performed Blame Canada at the ceremony with black tape over his mouth, turning his back during profanity. The whole thing was a spectacle. The film grossed over $83 million worldwide on a $21 million budget, and it remains one of the highest-grossing R-rated animated films ever made. And here's a fact that I think is genuinely underappreciated. Parker and Stone also created The Book of Mormon, which opened on Broadway on March 24th, 2011, and won 9 Tony Awards, including Best Musical. It's been running for over a decade. It's made hundreds of millions of dollars, and they made it alongside South Park at the same time, while also producing the show's regular seasons. The documentary 6 Days to Air literally opens with Parker and Stone leaving the Broadway opening night of The Book of Mormon to fly back to Los Angeles and start work on season 15. These 2 men simultaneously ran one of the most successful Broadway musicals of the 21st century and one of the longest-running animated series in television history. I don't think people fully appreciate how insane that is. And the musical won the Tony for Best Musical over Catch Me If You Can and The Scottsboro Boys. Parker also won the Tony for Best Book of a Musical. These are the same guys who made a show where a kid feeds another kid his parents in chili. Range. And then there's Parker's personal creative philosophy, which comes through in the 6 Days to Air documentary and in various interviews over the years. He's talked about how he's almost never satisfied with a finished episode. He's described the process of making the show as torture, that the deadline forces him to release something he'd otherwise keep reworking for weeks. He's talked about feeling physically ill from the stress. He said that every time an episode airs, he feels a mix of relief and shame. And this from a man who has won 5 Primetime Emmy Awards, a Peabody Award, a Tony, and has been described as one of the most talented satirists of his generation. I think that anxiety, that refusal to ever feel comfortable, is what keeps South Park sharp. It's what prevents the show from becoming complacent the way so many long-running series do. Parker is never happy with the work, and that unhappiness, paradoxically, is what makes the work good. If you've ever created something and released it into the world before you felt it was ready, you know exactly what that feels like. And Parker has done it over 300 times. The Simpsons and South Park have a complicated relationship that most casual fans underestimate. When 200 and 201 were banned, The Simpsons included a chalkboard gag in which Bart wrote something commending South Park's handling of the censorship situation. Matt Groening has spoken positively about South Park in interviews, but there's a deeper context. When South Park premiered in 1997, it was seen by many as a successor to, or competitor with, The Simpsons as the dominant animated satire on American television. The truth is, the two shows have always occupied different spaces. The Simpsons is network television family comedy with satirical elements. South Park is cable-only pure satire. They've circled each other for decades, occasionally jabbing, mostly coexisting. The real rivalry, the one that became famous, was between South Park and Family Guy, which Parker and Stone publicly mocked in the Cartoon Wars two-parter and have criticized in numerous interviews for what they consider lazy, formulaic writing. They've also taken shots at The Simpsons occasionally, particularly in the episode Simpsons Already Did It from season 6, which addressed the anxiety of influence that comes from working in a space that The Simpsons pioneered. Now, I want to talk about the serialization era, because understanding this period is crucial to understanding where South Park is today and where it might be going. In the first 18 seasons, roughly 1997 through 2014, South Park was almost entirely episodic. Each episode was self-contained. Status quo was restored by the end. Kenny died and came back. Characters didn't age. Events from previous episodes were rarely referenced. There were occasional exceptions. Kenny's permanent death in season 5 and return in season 6, the ongoing development of Butters as a character. But broadly, every episode was a reset. Then came season 19 in 2015, and everything changed. The show shifted to serialized storytelling, with ongoing storylines that threaded through every episode. PC Principle was introduced. Gentrification became a season-long theme. Characters began experiencing consequences that carried forward. And Season 20, which aired in the fall of 2016, doubled down on this approach, tying its narratives to the 2016 presidential election with an ongoing story about internet trolls, political polarization, and Cartman's relationship with Heidi Turner. Here's where the iceberg gets really interesting. The Season 20 finale, The End of Serialization as We Know It, which aired December 7th, 2016, was originally written as a completely different episode. Parker and Stone had prepared an episode assuming Hillary Clinton would win the presidential election. When Donald Trump won instead, they had to completely rewrite the episode in less than 24 hours. The original Clinton victory version, sometimes called The Very First Gentleman, was partially completed, but never aired. Production materials for it exist in some form, making it one of the most fascinating what-if artifacts in television history. And the title of the finale, The End of Serialization as We Know It, was both a plot point and a meta-commentary. Parker and Stone were announcing, through the episode itself, that they were done with the serialized format. The experiment was over, they were going back, and the fallout is still being felt. After season 20, the show found a middle ground. Episodes that work as standalones, but exist within a looser continuity. Characters have evolved. Relationships have changed. The town remembers what happened. It's not the hard reset of the early years, but it's not the dense serialization of seasons 19 and 20 either. Remember what I said earlier about the 6-day production schedule? Here's why that matters in the context of serialization. When every episode is self-contained, you can write it in a week. The idea comes on Thursday. The script is done by Monday. The animation is finished by Wednesday morning. Ship it. But when episodes need to connect, when plot threads carry forward, when character arcs progress logically, you can't do all of that in 6 days. You need a roadmap. And planning is the opposite of what makes South Park great. The show thrives on spontaneity. It thrives on responding to the real world in real time. Serialization undermines that, which is why the Paramount Plus specials work so well as the long-form canvas. They give Parker and Stone the space for extended narratives without constraining the weekly show. There's a planned episode called The Return of Lemmiwinks that was in development around 2004 and was never produced. Lemmiwinks, for those who don't know, is a gerbil introduced in the Season 6 episode The Death Camp of Tolerance, in which he was inserted into Mr. Slave's anus and had to journey through his intestinal tract in a Hobbit-style quest. The character became a fan favorite, and a sequel episode was apparently in various stages of development before being shelved. Production materials exist, but the episode was never completed. It sits in the iceberg alongside other unrealized South Park projects, a reminder that for every episode we've seen, there are ideas that existed in some form and never made it to air. The Tolkien Black revelation deserves its own discussion. For 25 seasons, the only black child in the main cast was named what appeared to be Token, an obvious commentary on tokenism in media. Then, in Season 25, Episode 3, The Big Fix, which aired February 16, 2022, it was revealed that his name was actually Tolkien, as in J.R.R. Tolkien. Stan is the only character who didn't know this, and the episode plays his ignorance for comedy, while making a pointed commentary about the assumptions audiences make about black characters. Parker and Stone had apparently been planning this reveal for years, and the show's official materials were retroactively updated to reflect the correct spelling. It's one of those South Park moments that works on 3 levels simultaneously. It's a joke, it's a meta-commentary, and it's a correction. Let me take you even deeper now, into territory that requires real fan dedication to know about. The construction paper from the original short films technically still exists. Parker and Stone kept some of the original cutouts from the 1995 Spirit of Christmas, and a few have surfaced at various points. The 1992 short was made during a student film screening at the University of Colorado, and the physical materials from that are likely lost, but the 1995 materials have been preserved to some extent because of how significant the short became. There's the George Clooney connection, which runs deeper than most people know. Clooney was one of the people who allegedly helped spread the 1995 Spirit of Christmas tape around Hollywood. He was a fan from the beginning, and he appeared on the show, voicing Stan's gay dog, Sparky, in the Season 1 episode Big Gay Al's Big Gay Boat Ride. He later voiced the Doctor in the South Park movie. These weren't stunt castings. Clooney genuinely wanted to be part of the show and was willing to play a barking dog to do it. Parker and Stone have said that Clooney's enthusiasm helped give the show credibility in Hollywood circles during its earliest and most vulnerable days. The show's theme song was performed by Primus. Les Claypool, Primus's lead singer and bassist, performed the vocals alongside Parker and Stone. The theme has been modified multiple times over the years, with different arrangements and lyrics, but the core melody has remained consistent since 1997, and it contains a secret. Kenny's muffled line in the theme changes from season to season, and fans have spent decades deciphering what he's saying. In the earliest seasons, his line translates to something along the lines of extremely explicit commentary about his sexual preferences. In later seasons, the line changes. It's a small Easter egg, but it's one more example of the show rewarding obsessive attention. There's the real South Park. It exists. It's an actual place in Colorado, technically a grassland valley, the South Park Basin, located in Park County, about an hour southwest of Denver. The town in the show is fictional, but the name is real, and so is the geography. Parker grew up in Conifer, Colorado, a small mountain community not far from the South Park Basin. The town in the show is a heightened, absurd version of the kinds of communities Parker knew growing up. And then there's something that sits at the absolute bottom of the iceberg, and it's not a fact. It's a question. What happens when South Park ends? Parker and Stone signed a deal in 2021 worth $900 million that extends through at least 2027. Then in July 2025, they signed a new 5-year deal with Paramount Plus that extends the show further, with 10 episodes to be produced per year. As of late 2025, the show has 28 seasons. Parker is in his mid-50s. Stone is the same age. They've been making this show since they were in their late 20s. It has consumed their entire adult lives, and at some point, it will end. When that happens, what's left? The episodes, obviously. The specials, the movie, the games, the musical, but also the iceberg. The layers of trivia and history and controversy and hidden aliens and banned episodes and alternate timelines and junk data on golf game discs. The entire accumulated weight of nearly 3 decades of creation. And I think the reason the iceberg resonates as a format for South Park is that the show itself is an iceberg. The surface, the crude jokes, the profanity, the shock value, is what most people see. It's what critics point to when they dismiss it. But below the surface, there's a depth and a consistency of worldview that has sustained the show for nearly 30 years. Parker and Stone have a philosophy, even if they'd resist calling it that. They believe that most ideologies are stupid, that most powerful people are frauds, that most movements are co-opted by opportunists, and that the only honest position is to mock everything equally while admitting that you don't have the answers either. South Park doesn't care whether you're liberal or conservative, religious or atheist, rich or poor. If you're a hypocrite, you're a target. And the show has applied that principle so consistently across so many years that it's become something more than comedy. It's become a worldview, a flawed one, certainly, an incomplete one, but a consistent one. And consistency in a medium defined by compromise and calculation is worth something. But I'm not going to let them off the hook entirely, because there's a legitimate criticism of South Park's worldview that sits at the bottom of the iceberg. And I think acknowledging it makes the show more interesting, not less. The criticism is this: by mocking everything equally, by positioning themselves as above all ideologies, Parker and Stone sometimes create a nihilism that lets the audience off the hook too easily. If everything is equally stupid, then nothing matters. If every position is equally mockable, then why bother believing in anything? There's a smugness to the "both sides are equally dumb" approach that can, at times, feel like an excuse not to engage seriously with difficult questions. The show's most famous episode endings, where Kyle or Stan delivers a, "I learned something today" speech, often conclude with some variation of, "the truth is somewhere in the middle," or "maybe there is no right answer." And while that's sometimes genuinely wise, it can also be intellectually lazy. I think the show is at its best when it commits to a point of view. Trapped in the Closet doesn't hedge about Scientology. It presents the religion's origin story with the banner, "This is what Scientologists actually believe," and lets the absurdity speak for itself. Man Bear Pig, which originally presented Al Gore's environmental warnings as laughable, was later revisited in season 22, when the show acknowledged that climate change was real and that their earlier mockery was wrong. That's remarkable. A show that had spent a decade mocking climate concern came back and said, effectively, "We were wrong." That takes more courage than mocking both sides. And it happened because Parker and Stone are genuinely intellectually honest, even when that honesty requires admitting their own failures. I should also mention Parker and Stone's other major works, because they're part of the iceberg. They inform South Park and are informed by it in ways that most fans don't fully appreciate. Cannibal, the musical, originally called Alfred Packer, the musical, was their first feature film, made in 1993 while they were still at the University of Colorado. It tells the story of Alfred Packer, a real historical figure who was convicted of cannibalism in Colorado in 1874. Parker wrote, directed, produced, and starred in it. Stone produced it. They made it for about $125,000, partly funded by credit cards. It's a genuine musical, with original songs, and it's surprisingly good. More importantly, it established the creative template that Parker would use for everything that followed. Take something dark or taboo, turn it into a musical, play it with absolute sincerity, and let the contrast between the subject matter and the presentation do the comedy. That's the formula behind South Park. It's the formula behind the Book of Mormon. It's the formula behind Team America, World Police. Parker figured it out in a college movie about cannibalism, Team America. World Police, released in October 2004, is the Thunderbird-style marionette action film that Parker and Stone made between seasons 8 and 9 of South Park. It nearly killed them. Parker has said that the production was the most difficult experience of his career, harder than any season of South Park, harder than the Book of Mormon. The marionettes were incredibly difficult to work with. The action sequences required painstaking stop motion and puppet work. Parker was so exhausted and stressed that he considered quitting entertainment entirely. The film cost $32 million to make and grossed just over $50 million worldwide. It wasn't a box office smash, but it's become a cult classic. And some of its most famous scenes, the puppet sex scene, the America Fuck Yeah musical number, the film within a film parody of Hollywood jingoism, are as embedded in American popular culture as anything from South Park itself. And the thing about Team America that connects to the iceberg is this: it's the clearest expression of Parker and Stone's political philosophy outside of South Park. The film divides the world into three types: dicks, pussies, and assholes. The speech that explains this taxonomy, delivered by a drunk marionette in an alley, is vulgar and crude, and also, I'd argue, a genuine piece of political philosophy. It argues that aggressive interventionism, dicks, is sometimes necessary to stop truly destructive forces, assholes, even though the interventionists are themselves harmful, and that pacifists, pussies, are well-meaning but ultimately ineffective because they refuse to engage with the reality of power. You can agree or disagree with that analysis, but it's a coherent worldview, and it's the same worldview that underlies South Park's treatment of virtually every political topic. Orgazmo, released in 1997, the same year South Park premiered, is Parker and Stone's other feature film from this period. It's about a Mormon missionary who becomes a porn star. It was rated NC-17, which effectively killed its theatrical release. It's largely forgotten now, but it's worth watching as a time capsule of where Parker and Stone's heads were at the moment they were about to become famous. It's crude, it's low budget, and it's surprisingly sweet in places. Parker plays the lead. Stone has a supporting role, and the whole thing has the same energy as early South Park. Two guys with no money and no filter making exactly the movie they wanted to make. Consequences be damned. Now, I've been going for a while, and I'm aware that I've been throwing a lot at you. That's the nature of the iceberg format. It's designed to overwhelm, to make you feel the sheer volume of what exists below the surface. And South Park has more below the surface than almost any other show in television history, because it's been running so long and its creators have been so prolific and so willing to court controversy. So let me talk about a few more deep iceberg entries before we start wrapping up, because these are the ones that keep me up at night. The show's relationship with Mormonism is fascinatingly complex. Parker grew up in Colorado, which has a significant Mormon population, and his experiences with Mormon families and culture informed multiple episodes, all about Mormons. Season 7, Episode 12, November 19th, 2003, retells the origin story of Mormonism through musical numbers, complete with a chorus that sings "Dum Dum 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 Dum" after each increasingly absurd historical claim. And yet the episode ends with the Mormon kid, Gary, confronting Stan with genuine grace. He tells Stan that his family is happy, that their faith gives them community and purpose, and essentially asks, "What has your cynicism given you?" It's one of the most morally complex endings in the show's history, and it contains the seed of what would become the Book of Mormon, which mocks Mormonism with the same enthusiasm, but ultimately concludes that faith itself, even misguided faith, can be a force for good. Parker has talked about how he and Stone genuinely like Mormons as people, even as they find the religion's claims absurd. That tension between affection for believers and contempt for belief systems runs through almost everything they make. There's also the matter of the show's approach to disability, which has been both groundbreaking and controversial. Jimmy Valmer and Timmy Birch were introduced as recurring disabled characters in seasons 4 and 5 respectively, and they've been handled with a level of respect and complexity that most animated shows don't even attempt. Jimmy is a stand-up comedian with cerebral palsy and crutches. Timmy uses a wheelchair and has limited speech, and the show doesn't sanitize them. They're treated as full characters, capable of cruelty, kindness, comedy, and tragedy. The episode Cripple Fight, Season 5, Episode 2, June 27, 2001, features a prolonged physical fight between Jimmy and Timmy that is as violent and graphic as any fight the show has depicted. It's uncomfortable to watch, and that discomfort is the point. The show is arguing that treating disabled characters with kid gloves is its own form of discrimination. By refusing to soften them, South Park gives them a dignity that many well-intentioned portrayals deny. The Make Love Not Warcraft episode, Season 10, Episode 8, October 4th, 2006, deserves mention not just because it's one of the most popular episodes ever made, but because of the behind-the-scenes collaboration that made it possible. Blizzard Entertainment, the developer of World of Warcraft, actively worked with the South Park team to create in-game footage for the episode. Blizzard provided the production team with access to their tools and helped render the World of Warcraft sequences that appear throughout the episode. This kind of direct collaboration between a television production and a game developer was unusual in 2006 and set a precedent for how shows would engage with gaming culture in the years that followed. The episode won the Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program, one of 5 South Park has won overall. And here's one more deep entry that I think is genuinely eerie. The show has, on multiple occasions, depicted scenarios that later played out in reality. This is often attributed to coincidence or to the show's general prescience about cultural trends, but some instances are striking. The show depicted a scenario very similar to the way the COVID-19 pandemic would unfold: mass panic, contradictory government messaging, conspiracy theories, years before it happened, through various episodes about disease and public health hysteria. The pandemic special, which aired September 30th, 2020, was one of the most watched South Park episodes in years, specifically because the show was addressing something that was actually happening in real time. Parker and Stone wrote it during the lockdown, working remotely for the first time in the show's history. The South Park Studios production company had closed when the pandemic began in March 2020, forcing the crew to work from home. The fact that South Park, a show defined by its in-person, all-hands-on-deck production process, managed to produce content during a global pandemic is a testament to the team's adaptability and Parker's refusal to stop working. Look, I know this has been a long one, and if you've made it this far, I genuinely appreciate it. But there's one more thing I want to talk about, and it's the deepest layer of all. The word shit was said 162 times in the Season 5 premiere, It Hits the Fan, which aired June 20th, 2001. The episode was about the moment when a fictional television show said shit uncensored on air, and the entire town of South Park descends into chaos as everyone starts using the word freely. It was a meta-commentary on the FCC, censorship standards, and the arbitrary nature of what's considered acceptable on television. The count, 162 uses, was deliberate and tracked by an on-screen counter during the original broadcast. At the time, it set a record for the most uses of the word in a single television episode. South Park holds a Guinness World Record for the most profanity in an animated series, and It Hits the Fan is a significant part of why. The Simpsons and South Park have a complicated relationship that most casual fans underestimate. The two shows have referenced each other numerous times over the years, and it's mostly been friendly. When 200 and 201 were banned, The Simpsons included a chalkboard gag in which Bart wrote something commending South Park's handling of the situation. Matt Groening, the creator of The Simpsons, has spoken positively about South Park in interviews, but there's a deeper connection that fewer people know about. When South Park premiered in 1997, it was seen by many as a successor to, or competitor with, The Simpsons as the dominant animated satire on American television. And the truth is, South Park didn't replace The Simpsons so much as it existed alongside it, occupying a different space. The Simpsons was network television. South Park was cable. The Simpsons was family comedy with satirical elements. South Park was pure satire that sometimes included family comedy. The two shows circled each other for decades, occasionally jabbing, mostly coexisting. The real rivalry, the one that became famous, was between South Park and Family Guy, which Parker and Stone publicly mocked in the Cartoon Wars two-parter and have criticized in numerous interviews for what they consider lazy writing. Here's something I find genuinely interesting as a piece of iceberg territory. The show's approach to continuity has gone through multiple distinct phases, and understanding those phases helps explain a lot about how the show has evolved. In the first 18 seasons, roughly 1997 through 2014, South Park was almost entirely episodic. Each episode was self-contained. Status quo was restored by the end. Kenny died and came back. Characters didn't age. Events from previous episodes were rarely referenced. There were occasional exceptions. Kenny's permanent death in Season 5 and return in Season 6, the ongoing development of Butters as a character, the shift from chef to other adult figures. But broadly speaking, every episode was a reset. Then came Season 19 in 2015, and everything changed. The show shifted to serialized storytelling, with ongoing storylines that threaded through every episode. PC Principle was introduced. Gentrification became a season-long theme. Characters began experiencing consequences that carried forward. And Season 20, which aired in the fall of 2016, doubled down on this approach, tying its narratives to the 2016 presidential election with an ongoing story about internet trolls, political polarization, and Cartman's relationship with Heidi Turner. The thing is, the serialized approach was extremely controversial among fans. Some loved it, some hated it, and Parker and Stone themselves seemed to struggle with it. The Season 20 finale, The End of Serialization as We Know It, which aired December 7th, 2016, was, and this is one of those deep iceberg facts, originally written as a different episode entirely. Parker and Stone had prepared an episode assuming Hillary Clinton would win the presidential election. When Donald Trump won instead, they had to completely rewrite the episode in less than 24 hours. The original Clinton victory version, sometimes called The Very First Gentleman, was partially completed, but never aired. Its production materials exist in some form, making it one of the most fascinating alternate history artifacts in television. And the fallout from the serialization era is still being felt. After season 20, Parker and Stone pulled back significantly. Season 21 returned to a more episodic format with lighter continuity threads. And by season 22, the show had found a middle ground. Episodes that work as standalones, but exist within a looser continuity, where the events of previous seasons have actually happened. Characters have aged slightly. Relationships have changed. The town has evolved. It's not the hard reset of the early years, but it's not the dense serialization of seasons 19 and 20 either. It's something new, and I think it's the version of South Park that's best suited for the show going forward. The fully serialized seasons were ambitious but constraining. The fully episodic seasons were free but could feel weightless. The current approach gives the show both structure and freedom. Remember what I said earlier about the 6-day production schedule? Here's why that matters in the context of serialization. When every episode is self-contained, you can write it in a week. The idea comes on Thursday. The script is done by Monday. The animation is finished by Wednesday morning. Ship it. But when episodes need to connect to each other, when plot threads need to carry forward, when character arcs need to progress logically from one week to the next, you can't do that in 6 days. You need to plan. You need a roadmap. And planning is the opposite of what makes South Park great. The show thrives on spontaneity. It thrives on being able to respond to what happened in the real world 2 days ago. Serialization undermines that, which is why I think Parker and Stone backed away from it. Not because they couldn't do it. The post-COVID specials prove they can write long-form narrative when they want to, but because the weekly format requires a different approach. The specials give them the long-form canvas. The weekly episodes give them the immediacy. Both are South Park. They just serve different purposes. Let me take you even deeper now, into territory that requires some real fan dedication to know about. There was a planned episode called The Return of Lemmiwinks that was in development around 2004 and was never produced. Lemmiwinks, for those who don't know, is a gerbil who was introduced in the season 6 episode The Death Camp of Tolerance, in which he was inserted into Mr. Slave's anus and had to journey through his intestinal tract in a Hobbit-style quest. The character became a fan favorite, and a sequel episode was apparently in various stages of development before being shelved. Production materials exist, but the episode was never completed. The South Park pilot, the original unaired version of Cartman Gets an Anal Probe, contains differences from the version that eventually broadcast. In the original cut, Cartman had a father and a sister, neither of whom appeared in the series' subsequent run. The pilot also featured different jokes, slightly different animation, and at one point, an animator's hand is clearly visible in the frame. When Comedy Central executives saw the pilot, Doug Herzog, who would later become president of the network, suggested that the running gag of killing Kenny might not work, leading Parker and Stone to look at him funny before he shut up and got out of the way, as he later recalled in the 2016 Hollywood Reporter oral history. The character name change from Token Black to Tolkien Black is one of the cleverest long-game jokes in the show's history. For 25 seasons, the only black child in the main cast was named what appeared to be Token, an obvious commentary on tokenism in media. Then in season 25, episode 3, The Big Fix, which aired February 16th, 2022, it was revealed that his name was actually Tolkien, as in J.R.R. Tolkien. Stan is the only person who didn't know this, and the episode plays his ignorance for comedy, while also making a pointed commentary about assumptions people make about black characters. Parker and Stone had apparently been planning this reveal for years, and the show's official materials, including the South Park wiki, were retroactively updated to reflect the correct spelling. It's one of those moves that's simultaneously a joke, a meta-commentary, and a correction all at once. There's also the matter of the show's relationship with real-world events in ways that border on the prophetic. South Park has, on multiple occasions, depicted events or scenarios that later happened in reality. The show predicted the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in a general sense, mocking BP's cavalier attitude toward environmental safety long before the actual disaster. It depicted a scenario remarkably similar to the PlayStation Network hack of 2011 in an episode that aired months before the actual event. And perhaps most famously, the show's depiction of Caitlyn Jenner's transition in 2015 was so early and so pointed that it became a flashpoint in cultural conversations about how media should engage with transgender issues. Whether the show got that one right is a matter of fierce debate, and I'm not going to pretend there's a consensus. I want to circle back to something I mentioned earlier, because it's one of those connections that runs through the entire iceberg: the construction paper. From the 1992 student film to the digital animation of 2025, the construction paper aesthetic has been the single most consistent element of South Park's identity. It's the thread that connects the zero-budget college project to the $900 million media empire. And I think the decision to maintain that look, to never upgrade to a more polished animation style, is one of the smartest creative choices in the history of television. Here's why. The crude animation is what allows the 6-day schedule. More complex animation would require more time, more artists, more resources. It would slow the show down, and slowing the show down would kill the thing that makes it relevant. South Park's ability to respond to current events within days is the source of its cultural power. That power comes from the production speed, and the production speed comes from the animation style. And the animation style comes from 2 college students who couldn't afford anything better than construction paper and glue. The limitation became the feature. The poverty of the original materials became the foundation of a billion-dollar franchise. And I think that's beautiful, in a way that the show itself would never admit to. There are layers of the iceberg that are less about facts and more about interpretations, about the way the show's meaning changes depending on when you encounter it and who you are when you do. And this is the part of the video where I want to slow down and just think about what South Park means. Not what it says, what it means. If you watched South Park in 1997 as a teenager or a young adult, it meant rebellion. It was the show your parents didn't want you to watch. It was crude and offensive and hilarious, and watching it felt like getting away with something. The characters said things you weren't allowed to say. They did things you weren't supposed to do. And the show had this energy, this reckless, anarchic energy that made everything else on television feel safe and boring by comparison. If you discovered South Park in the mid-2000s, during the show's creative peak, roughly seasons 5 through 10, it meant satire. The show had evolved beyond pure shock value into something more sophisticated. Episodes like Trapped in the Closet, Make Love, Not Warcraft, Man Bear Pig, and Scott Tenorman Must Die weren't just funny, they were smart. They were making arguments about religion, technology, environmental politics, and human nature. The show had found its voice, and that voice was sharp and precise, and willing to go places that other shows wouldn't even consider. If you came to South Park during the Serialization era, seasons 19 and 20, which is roughly 2015 through 2016, it meant something else entirely. The show was grappling with gentrification, political correctness, internet culture, and the collapse of shared reality. PC Principal wasn't just a character, he was a diagnosis. The show was trying to understand a world that was changing faster than anyone could process, and it was using serialized storytelling to explore ideas that were too complex for single episodes. And if you're watching South Park now, in 2025, with 28 seasons behind it and a deal that extends through at least 2027, I think it means endurance. It means that something can be crude and profound at the same time. That a show doesn't have to choose between being funny and being meaningful. That 2 guys who met in a film class and started making voices to annoy their professors can build something that outlasts presidencies, cultural movements, and entire eras of television. And maybe that's enough, or maybe it isn't. That's for you to decide. Let me bring us to one of the absolute deepest layers of the iceberg. The stuff that exists in the margins, the footnotes, the spaces between what's official and what's rumored. There's the George Clooney connection, which runs deeper than most people know. Clooney was one of the people who allegedly helped spread the 1995 Spirit of Christmas tape around Hollywood. He was a fan of the show from the beginning, and he appeared on the show, voicing Stan's gay dog, Sparky, in the season 1 episode, Big Gay Al's Big Gay Boat Ride. He later voiced the Doctor in the South Park movie. These weren't stunt castings for publicity. Clooney genuinely wanted to be part of the show and was willing to play a barking dog to do it. Parker and Stone have said that Clooney's enthusiasm for the show in its earliest days helped give it credibility in Hollywood circles. There's the matter of the show's theme song, which was performed by Primus. Les Claypool, Primus's lead singer, performed the vocals alongside Parker and Stone. The theme has been modified multiple times over the years, with different arrangements, different lyrics, and different character compositions. But the core melody, that opening bass line, that immediately recognizable guitar riff, has remained consistent since 1997. It's one of the most iconic theme songs in television, and the fact that it was performed by an actual rock band gives South Park a sonic identity that most animated shows lack. The theme also contains a secret. Kenny's muffled line in the theme song changes from season to season, and fans have spent years deciphering what he's saying. In the earliest seasons, his line translates to something along the lines of, "I like girls with big fat titties. I like girls with big vaginas." In later seasons, the line changes. It's a small thing, but it's one more example of the show rewarding close attention. There's the real South Park. It exists. It's an actual place in Colorado, technically a grassland valley, the South Park Basin, located in Park County, about an hour southwest of Denver. The town in the show is fictional, but the name is real, and so is the geography. The mountains, the small town isolation, the Colorado setting, all of it is rooted in real landscape. Parker grew up in Conifer, Colorado, a small mountain community not far from the South Park Basin. The town in the show is a heightened, absurd version of the kinds of communities Parker knew growing up. When fans make pilgrimages to South Park, they're visiting a real place that has a complicated relationship with the show that made its name famous. And then there's the matter of the show's legacy, which is perhaps the deepest layer of the iceberg because it's still being written. South Park premiered in 1997, the same year as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Oz, and Daria. It outlasted all of them. It's been on the air through 4 presidents. It survived the transition from cable dominance to streaming. It survived the serialization experiment. It survived death threats. It survived losing a principal cast member. It survived the cultural moment where every show that trafficked in transgressive humor was scrutinized and many were canceled. South Park is still here, and I keep coming back to the question of why. Why has this show, of all shows, endured? Why is it still relevant? Why does it still get people angry, make people think, make people laugh? I think the answer is in the iceberg itself. South Park works because it has depth. Not depth in the literary, English class sense, though it has that too. Depth in the sense that there's always more to discover. Every episode rewards rewatching. Every season adds new layers. Every behind-the-scenes detail reveals something about the creative process that illuminates the show itself. The hidden aliens, the banned episodes, the death threats, the construction paper, the 6-day schedule, the $900 million deal, the golf game, the college dorm room. It all connects. It all matters. And the deeper you go, the more you understand not just what South Park is, but why it is. And that why, the relentless, stubborn, occasionally foolish insistence on saying whatever they want, whenever they want, regardless of consequences, is the heart of everything. Here's the last thing I want to leave you with, and it ties all the way back to the beginning. That video file on the Tiger Woods disk, zzdumy.dat, dummy data, junk, something that was never supposed to be seen. And it contained the seed of one of the most influential pieces of American popular culture of the last 50 years. South Park started as junk data. It started as a Christmas card nobody was supposed to keep. It started as a joke between 2 college students who were bored and weird and didn't know they were creating something that would still be running 3 decades later. And I think that's the real iceberg, not the facts, not the mysteries, not the banned episodes, or the hidden aliens, or the death threats. The real iceberg is that South Park exists at all. That something this crude, this offensive, this relentlessly provocative has survived for 28 seasons in an era where almost everything gets canceled eventually. That tells you something about the show, and it tells you something about us. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. I know it was a long one, but I hope it gave you something to think about. If you enjoyed this, subscribing really helps us keep making these for you. It's free, it takes a second, and it genuinely makes a difference. Good night, everyone. Sleep well. It's a good one to fall asleep to, and if you can't sleep, well, that's what the next video is for.